This episode of the Event Industry News podcast is sponsored by Evolution Dome, award-winning temporary inflatable event structures. Take a look at their structures at evolutiondome.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune in to our podcast from today. And another warm one here in the UK today. For context, we're recording on Monday, the 12th of June. And for our overseas followers who think that it's all grey skies and cloudy and drizzly rain, then I'm delighted to tell you that it's completely that's all bets are off this week at the moment. It's absolutely stonking outside in the UK at the moment. Glorious days. Everyone in the UK is sat outside with glasses of wine. For our international listeners, that's all we're doing this week, is we're all sat outside with cold beer and glasses of wine. On to today's episode, and we're going to be talking a bit about scaling events and exhibitions, which to avoid rampant narcissism, I do have a little bit of experience of now, having been on the production team for Event Tech Live for the last few years, and having been out in Las Vegas when we delivered the first Event Tech Live Las Vegas a couple of months ago. My guest today is the CEO of the Raccoon Media Group, and is a name that crops up regularly on Event Industry News. These guys have won awards. They've been through significant expansion over the last few years that has seen their brands and the shows and the events that they operate really sort of boom and become a major player in the events industry, not just in the UK now, but internationally. I'm delighted to say that Mike Seaman joins the Event Industry News podcast. Mike, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you for having me, mate. I feel like I should be outside with a cold beer rather than doing this after that intro.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm going to do at the end of today's recording. As I said, I would say, and I'm no doubt you'll agree with me, that rapid expansion is maybe somewhat of an understatement, really, when you look at where you started, where you sit today as an organization. For anybody that might not have come across you before in some of the news articles, I would first of all say to anybody tuning into this today, have a quick search on Event Industry News, because you'll find several articles with Mike's name in there and give you a bit of context. But let's go back to the beginning and just to tell us a little bit how how Raccoon Events started as it was.
Yeah, it was Raccoon Events back then. I'd sort of worked in the industry for a long time. I worked for a number of the big organisers and loved it. I just love events. It's kind of pretty much all I've ever known. And then in 2016, we sort of finally had the idea for the National Running Show, which is when we incorporated as a company. We ran our first event in 2018. That was me and a few mates in a shed at the end of my garden with a ropey air conditioning unit that kept one half of you cold and the other half boiling hot. And I was prepared for everything except for it to succeed. And
Brilliant.
I was like, oh man, it's worked. And then it rumbled on from there. And that show's now still our biggest show, although the Outdoor Expo is creeping up on it. But that show's just developed a life of its own. It's phenomenal now. It does like nearly 30,000 people. It's like the start of the running season. And we built our business from the success of that particular event. Sort of fast forward now, we've got 10 events, 7 in the UK, 3 in the States. We've grown mainly by launching, but we have acquired 2 shows. So we've got a cycling show, we've got a couple of snow shows in the UK, we've got the running show, we've got the equine show, outdoor show. We've just acquired the Allergy and Free From and Just V shows. So that should have been announced. I think that might not have been announced yet, so that might be an exclusive.
They are on your website, I would say. So
okay,
they are
up
and live on your website. So they're very much announced. Go and check out the website, everybody.
Yeah, check out raccoonmediagroup.com. So we've got those things, and then in the States we acquired a snow show out there. We ran a running show, and we've just launched this year for the first time our Outdoor Expo, and all 3 of those are in Boston. So yeah, we've gone from being in a shed, we went to a slightly posher shed, and now we've got an office, and then we went for a slightly bigger office, and that's all happened since 2018 when that first show ran. So it does feel like a crazy ride if you factor in that there was that COVID thing happened in the middle of all of that.
I was going to say, yeah, there's a big sort of white elephant in the room in the middle of that sort of time period, isn't there? When we look at where you started, where you are now, and then not only has that rapid expansion happened in what would be a short period of time regardless. But the caveat and the sort of the asterisk down the bottom is with 2 years where you probably couldn't do anything.
Well, yeah. I mean, though it did. I think it was the biggest opportunity that our industry had ever had, if you could time it right. So good time when it came back, because the resurgence of live events post COVID was huge. I mean, people are loving it. They're straight back in. So our strategy was launch and build during COVID, as opposed to, try and shift what we do. We did do a bit of digital stuff, and actually that was part of the rebrand from when we went to Raccoon Events to Raccoon Media Group. Was we realised that we had an opportunity to become a multi-platform media business as opposed to just a straight up exhibition business. We've got best part of 500,000 consumers on our database now who would never bought those records from people, because you can't in the UK. It's all GDPR compliant. So that's a really solid group of fanatics and fans that love our brands that we can talk to 365. Now, we will always have live events to give them that sort of big hero point in the year where the community gets together, but we also quite rightly should be talking to them throughout the year and selling access to that data via surveys, etc., and things like that. So that's kind of where I see the future of the business as being a blended sort of events and digital business. But yeah, it's mad. We've got 30 odd people, and I sometimes walk in and go, "Who's paying all these people?"
Oh God, it's me. One thing that I thought when I first came across Raccoon Events and I saw your brands a few years ago, and looking at it again this morning before we came on to do the recording, have a look through the website. There's always talk in the event sector of communities and your audience and building this community amongst your audience. But when I look at the audiences to which you produce shows that the audiences that they serve, cycling, running particularly, really, really, really strong communities with a strong ethic of collaboration and working together. If you look at the success in the UK of things like Park Run and the community that's created, and the sort of the neutral aspect in terms of its elitism, anything goes, doesn't matter whether you can run fast, quickly, what time you do, there is a community there. And I'm just curious to ask you today whether or not the growth and the rapid growth has been helped by the communities that the events actually are serving.
100%. So when we look at a market, and we're always looking to launch, I mean, we've got anywhere between 10 and 20 ideas on the go at any one time. The first thing we look at is, are they passionate, self-identifying consumers? So do they love it, and are they proud of it, and are they prepared to wear a badge that says, "I am one of these"? So I'm a horse enthusiast, I'm a snow sports enthusiast, I'm a runner, I'm a cyclist. These are all the things that we kind of look for when we move into markets, because that's where you see these mobile communities that often don't get a chance to meet up. They're not given an opportunity, particularly as we're being driven more and more online, particularly as high street retail's disappearing, particularly as live events, as in sort of the sporting events, they're getting more and more challenged and, quite expensive in some cases. To book onto a marathon or an ultra marathon or a sportive or whatever it may be becomes, that can be quite expensive and becomes out of reach for some people. So how do you connect those people en masse in a meaningful way that are happy to be identified in that way? So in many ways, we've sort of modeled ourselves on the Comic-Con type approach. Those events are absolutely brilliant, and they really engage and sort of galvanize the communities by just existing. So in all of the markets that we're in, we would like to do that, but our verticals are sort of anything to do with getting people healthy or getting people active.
And again, that's obvious when you look through the website. At first glance, equine, running, two different communities, but there are a lot of parallels in there. I know you're not going to just shout out your ideas and what you may have up your sleeve, but when you say you're sort of working on sort of 10 other ideas at any one point, do they all continue that sort of theme where on the face of it they might not be the same, but actually there's an underlying community or ethos that retains some parallel with what you've already got?
Yeah, that's very, because we've got kind of a cookie cutter approach to our events. They're actually quite similar underneath the window dressing. And we want to make sure that we stick to what we know, we do what we're good at, and we try and replicate the successes that we've had. Obviously, you have to adapt when you move into each market. On the face of it, equine and the running show are the least similar, but weirdly, they're actually kind of the most similar in the way that they operate, because the only events that existed in the running community previously were events that were attached to a race. And the majority of the equine events that exist are attached to some kind of a show where you actually show the horses. Whereas what we wanted to create was start of season premium retail experiences. So in those instances, weirdly, they're the most similar. And I remember that event came about because an old friend of mine from uni, we were just chatting, and she's a horse enthusiast. And I just went, I bet, we were chatting about what she loves. And I was just like, I bet I could do a running show for the horse market. She's like, you're mental. And then we worked it through, and a couple of glasses of wine later, and then she ended up working for us, and now she runs the show. And it's we launched it. It ran in March last year, and it smashed it. It absolutely smashed it. It's got its place in the calendar now, and people are, it's way ahead of Critical Path. It's doing really, really well. So weird how these things come about.
Absolutely. Couple of directions that I wanted to sort of maybe steer the conversation today, Mike. One's on the topic of sustainability. It's a topic that's a subject that is basically included in every podcast I do now, that it's unavoidable, whether the podcast be solely focused on that topic or an element of it, and we'll come on to that in a bit. But when we're talking about sort of scalability, growth, moving shows onwards and outwards, you've got events now that run overseas, over in the USA now. And as I said in the introduction, I've now got, maybe it'd be unfair to say, a little bit of experience, because anybody that's taken an event from the UK and done it over in the USA has got probably a steep learning curve that they've gone through. What was the process like of deciding that you were gonna take events over to the USA? What was the sort of the catalyst for deciding there's a marketplace there, and talk us through that process?
Well, it started in my usual egotistical, I can do everything way. And I mean, obviously we knew there was a huge market out there. We'd had ambition from exhibitors that wanted to do it. And we knew that there were running communities over there. We knew the same problems existed. And we could have perhaps sort of started to believe our own hype. We went, right, we're going to go out there. We're going to have 3 in the first year. Then we'll have, this was just of the running show. Then we'll have another 3 and another 3. And we were trying to do all this through COVID. And we thought we could have a running show in every single state, and we got a bit fast and loose with perhaps the way that we started to execute, and then we had to sort of rein the vision back in again. But actually, we learned a lot of lessons along the way. The way they do business is very, very different. You and I talked briefly before the call about things like drayage and sort of
operationally there are challenges, aren't there? That operationally, anybody who's listened to this today, who's run events both in the UK or in Europe and in the USA, will know some of those logistical, technical, production challenges that differently, even down to simple things, Mike, like working in feet and inches instead of meters for floor plans.
Yeah, and that's you gotta relearn that, and I think there's a danger of applying a UK mindset to that, because we were like, oh my God, no one's going to ever do this. Like, it's going to be terrible. And actually, the way events work over there, they work. And actually, it's not for you to sort of come in and try and change the whole way the market operates, because the UK or the European or the wherever you are way of operating is better, because it's not. They're just different. And I think that was a bit of a learning curve for us. We tried to sort of counterbalance things. So we were trying to sort of offset drayage. We're trying to buy out the drayage for everybody and all of these kind of things. When you start going down that route, you just get yourself into a rabbit hole, and you just forget that you actually got to make some money somewhere along the lines. And the people are quite understanding of drayage. They don't like it, and they don't like a lot of the operational things. And I think some of the operational things, compared to working in the UK, are just pretty difficult. But those are the challenges that you have to get through, and that's the cost of doing business in another country.
Yeah, and that said, something that we realise, and I don't want to sort of keep bringing it back to our own experiences, but it's maybe a useful point of reference for you guys, is that we did also realise, and we had to keep telling ourselves, the people who are attending and the people who are exhibiting and the people who are contracting to us are USA companies for the most part. You know, the US based company. So this is what they're used to. Whilst it may be a little bit alien for us and a different way of doing things, like you said, events still happen over there. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And just because it's not how we do it over here doesn't mean that the event is going to fall over and not run. And if that's what they're used to, just let them get on with it in some respects.
Yeah, and if you want to access, pretty much the biggest market in the world, then you've got to make some concessions that perhaps they know what they're doing. And once we had our ego sort of taped down a little bit, and we started to acknowledge that, we started to do really well. And we now have focused on Boston. Like, we've got really strong community. Boston's a real running town, and then
I was going to say it's one of the big global marathons. Is it the Boston Marathon?
Yeah, and running is interwoven into Boston culture. It's like obviously the Boston Marathon itself is part of the marathon majors, but you've also got a lot of the major sort of footwear brands that are headquartered there. It's a real runner's city, and we were able to mobilize the community, do a really good show, even when it was minus 22 degrees on our opening day, which is the coldest day I think they'd ever had in Boston. The river flipping froze. The mayor comes out on the telly and was like doing warnings about don't go outside or you might die. Just what you want to hear. That just literally before your advert then plays on the same channel. And it's like, oh, brilliant. Thanks for that. But they're a hardy bunch. They showed up, they showed out. And we bought a snow show out there as well. So we've now got 2 really strong shows there. And then with the feedback that we've done and the research we've done, we think we can push our outdoor show out there with equal success. So that'll trade for the first time in March. And now we've built like a really strong base in Massachusetts. And the question for us now is, where do we go next? So which states, or do we bring more brands across first? So obviously we're looking at everything that we do in the UK and looking to see if and where it could run in the US. We'll grow either by just sort of organic growth of our existing products, but by launching and buying stuff as well. And we've been very aggressive with launches, partly through necessity, because we didn't have a big sort of checkbook to go and wave at people to go and buy stuff. But we have got a couple of smart acquisitions that we've made, a couple more that we're in the process of chatting through. So once you just have to watch your space on that. But we've now got to, as a strategy, work out whether it's changing location or bringing in new brands. And I think it will be possibly a combination of the two.
Yeah, going back to this sort of, I think I said probably at least 100 times, to two countries separated by a common language. When you look at the UK and the USA, but how did you find the challenge as an organizer of doing things like just even simple things like sourcing vendors? We sort of take it for granted over here that you can source vendors, contractors. Let's meet on site, let's do a quick walk around the venue. We hop in a car or we go on a train for an hour or so, and in the UK that's easy. How did you actually build those sort of same vendor relationships, for example, where there's a vast ocean separating the two of you?
Well, we didn't. We were quite poor at that because we were also doing a lot of this through COVID, so we couldn't. So site visits even wasn't really possible. So there's a little bit of blind faith, a little bit of using the connections that we had to facilitate correct connections to people that we trusted, and then a little bit of just rolling the dice and just hoping that people did what they said they would do. And actually, that's kind of bonded us together. So the people we've got a really strong operations team. So we use Maelstrom, who are an outsourced operations agency. And Matt and Fern, who sort of worked on it, are just phenomenal. So they enabled us to sort of get the event away without too many hiccups. I think there were, obviously going through COVID, everything was up in the air, and it was, everything was late, everything was this, that, and the other. So to even deliver a show was insane. But actually, to get to the point where, we got to this year where we had quite a few, I was really, really pleased with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I suppose that going back to that language thing, that there are all sorts of even regulatory things that we found challenging. We had to apply for a license, which we'd never had to do in the UK, but we had to apply for to the sort of city hall in Las Vegas, and obtain a license to host an event in a dedicated events venue.
And that changes state to state.
Yeah.
The tax rules change
Yeah.
state to state,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's So I mean, look, there's places you can go. So DIT or whatever it's called now are always really good to talk to because they can facilitate local market introductions. I'm very lucky to have some people in the background of our business who are very experienced at doing business in the States. So you can, if they don't know the answer, then they can always point you in the direction of someone who does. So that's very helpful. So make sure you have influential friends that can help connect you. And CISO is very good. CISO is a really good opportunity. So that's, for those who don't know, that's the Society of Independent Show Organisers, and they operate very similar to those. Your UK listeners will know the Association of Exhibition Organisers, or UFI. So CISO is the club you want to be in the States, and they've been very, very helpful for us.
Yeah, they had we found a really useful document on CISO's website. They're sort of, it's their effective guidebook for events, over there. There's a really, really useful and helpful document that you can get from CISO's website that answers a lot of really obvious questions, but when you are looking to go and do something over there for the first time, it really helped us and pointed us in the right direction and gave us answers that we just couldn't find anywhere else, to any number of simple little tasks or questions.
Well, this is the advantage of using an outsourced operations agency. Is I just say to Matt and Fern, I'm like, just make it happen, please, and they do all the grown-up hard work. I mean, to be, I can't underestimate the importance of them to the ability to execute over there. But then there's also the things like sales and knowing how you can sell. I mean, the F&B rules out there are very, very different in terms of what. Even being able to sell products for off-site consumption was pretty tricky. I think we've come to a resolution on that, but there's lots of different conversations, and I think the one thing that I've realised how lucky I am in the UK is I've actually got some, I think, quite strong relationships with the venues. Like they're really supportive of us, and there's always someone I can call if it goes wrong, and I think that's invaluable. And actually and stuff does go wrong. We're in events. Our job is not to prevent things from going wrong. It's to sort of kind of paint over
absolutely, plan A, B, C, and D.
Exactly, and that's, I think, having those senior level connections is really, really important. And if I could have my time again, I probably would do more of that, just sort of going out and networking. I think there's CISO do a CEO summit, which I've still never been to, but I kind of now realize that I really need to make that effort to be present in the market. Otherwise, you just get very transactional relationships, which isn't really how you get out of trouble. So, for me, I think having those deep, embedded, entrenched team relationships with your vendor partners, your supplier partners is something that I've learned to value even more.
Yeah, absolutely. That in some respects that does move us along nicely to the subject of sustainability that I said I wanted to approach and talk about, and just referencing something that you mentioned earlier on in today's episode about walking into the office now and seeing 30 people and going who pays who are all these people it's my company. There is an element of humor there, but we shouldn't shy away from the fact that taking on staff is a significant undertaking for any business. It's a financial commitment, there's a training commitment. It adds an element of added pressure to the existing team because you've got to be able to pay for those, which means you've got to expand as you're planning to do so. And all of that ties into the subject of sustainability. I would dare say that you've probably gone through periods where you've taken on quite a lot of people in a relatively short space of time. How did you approach accommodating them into the existing team and maybe designing sort of training and getting them up to speed as quickly as possible whilst still allowing them to learn the business?
I think someone really smartly said to me once, the most sustainable business is a profitable one. And I think that's kind of, so when you say sustainability, I immediately look towards environmental sustainability, but I think there's also business sustainability as well in there, which
Exactly.
is your point. And yeah, I think the first thing is there's a sailor called, I think it was Ben Ainsley, I might be misattributing it, but I think his rule was no dickheads on the boat.
Sounds like Ben Ainsley, yeah.
And I think that's quite a good motto, and we have mentioned that a few times on our journey, which is the first thing that you've got to build is a culture, and it's got to be people who flywheel principle. Everyone's got to be pushing in the same direction to keep you going forward. So that's really important to us. Are you a cultural fit? Are you someone who is going to whinge and moan, or you're someone who's going to just pick it up, figure it out, make it work? And because we are so fast moving, because we are quite entrepreneurial in our thinking, it's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to run that quick, and we're quite honest about what we are at the start, and then we're quite ruthless in those first sort of 3 months. If people don't fit, we'll move them out quite quickly. We've only ever had one person resign, and she's one of my best friends, and she basically resigned because she couldn't keep going at that pace, because she was supposed to only work on one show. I think by the time she left, she worked on about 6. And she's still one of my best friends. And but she's the only person who's actually resigned and left us because they didn't want to be here anymore. But we have moved a few people on because it just didn't quite work out. I think that's quite important. I think there's a moral obligation when you hire people. They are now in your care and in your responsibility, and we try and be like a good company. And I don't really know what that means, but it's about trying to be morally responsible for the people that you look after and the markets that you serve. And we kind of wrote down a list of values, a list of things that we believed in, which are on our website, and they're our company values. And we use that to kind of set the agenda. And then we sort of try and build a company culture that supports that. So probably the biggest things for us are the accountability based, not hours based. I do not want people in a business that's supposed to support health and wellness and activity outside. I do not want people feeling like it's a race to see who can stay at their desk the longest. And it's, that if they're going to the gym at lunchtime, that they then got to eat their sandwich while they're on a phone call to a major client. It's kind of, I don't believe in that big brother style of management. And I think that's shifted anyway with COVID. I think a lot of companies are sort of getting onto this, but we have no requirement to be in the office on any set days or any set hours. But I do have KPIs for every single staff member about what they're expected to deliver. If you can deliver that whilst riding a horse through the Sahara Desert, working an hour a day, good for you. If you want to come into the office, which a lot of people do, because actually I think we underestimate, particularly the younger people in our team, some of whom maybe live at home with parents, they actually quite like coming to an office. They don't necessarily have the ability to work at home, or necessarily enjoy working at home, but it's an option for them should they choose it. And I think if you treat people like grown-ups, then they behave like grown-ups. Then we've got all of the stuff around sustainability, as in environmental sustainability. We have a very open policy on that. We have no idea what we're doing. We are not experts in sustainability, but we do want to achieve net zero by 2025. And we have been measuring our carbon footprint. We have been doing this for a couple of years now. We measure it because we're growing at the same time. It's quite difficult to find an arbitrary measurement that actually means something, because obviously the more shows we run, the more people we've got, the bigger the footprint. But actually what we got down to was carbon footprint per visitor, because that enabled us to scale, but actually still make meaningful changes to the shows. And I could wang on about that for hours, but I'm conscious you don't want to listen to me all day.
Well, no, because instead they could come to Event Sustainability Live in November. The new show.
That sounds like a great place.
The
Where
new
is
show
it?
launching alongside Event Tech Live at XL London would be the
Well,
ideal.
how could I get tickets for that event, James? Where do I...
You don't need tickets. You can register for free if you work in the events industry and you want to find out more. Yeah, shameless plug, but it was worth mentioning. Like you said, but you actually touch on a really, really important point, because you said openly, we don't know what we're doing. We're just trying our best to sort of figure it out and using a means at a disposal. And that's refreshing to hear, because for a period of time, I think there was a reluctance amongst people who work in the events industry to admit that they didn't know what they were doing, that they all wanted to sort of peddle a PR line about sustainability and net zero and all the rest of it. We're gonna do this, and these are our targets, without actually really knowing how they were going to do it and what means were out there available to measure effectively what impact they were creating and making, and what they could potentially reduce it to longer term. And this is why it's so important now that I think we've reached or past the threshold where people now, like you've just done, are saying, look, we don't know, so let's talk to people who do. And there are more people who do know what they're talking about, doing things like we're launching Event Sustainability Live. I spoke to Duncan Reed on a recent episode about Reset Connect, which is not specifically for the events industry, but is a sustainability and net zero show for people who work in business and commerce. It's important that this is all happening.
It is difficult. I think the first thing is to acknowledge that it's okay not to know all of the answers, because actually no one does. And we are quite far along in terms of what we've done, because we hired a very good sustainability consultant very early. We developed a roadmap, we made a plan, we've adapted and learned as we've gone along. But I don't think there's no quick and easy win here. There's no silver bullet, and there's lots of people who are peddling products or greenwashing and you've got to be a little bit careful on that, because at some point that is going to get regulated, and it's not good enough to say I'm sustainable because I'm not that. Now, events, I believe, genuinely are sustainable at the heart of what they do, because you bring people together into a single place at one time where they can get everything they need in one hit, rather than going to. So in my instance, instead of going to 5 different sports shops or ordering 20 different items online and then sending 15 of them back, you can come to one place, you can try everything, you can buy it, and you can walk out with it. So I believe that is, by its nature, quite a sustainable procurement process, and that's the same across most markets. However, that doesn't give us the excuse to not do anything and not to change our behaviours. So we can change the way we operate, look at the way we build and design a show, look at the way that we travel to and from a show, and look at the way that we educate our visitors to travel to and from a show, and then look at how we offset our impact, then those are things that we should all be doing. And for us, it's measure, reduce, and then offset at the end. And that's our journey towards net zero. We've done our first measure, reduce phase. We're into our third now measure, reduce phase. And then, when we get to 2025, there's going to be an offset. We're already doing loads of stuff to offset our carbon impact. We've actually, I think one of the shows has already run in at carbon neutral, but we've got to get down to net zero. And part of that is educating our 3 sort of customer groups: our visitors, our suppliers, and our exhibitors. Suppliers, often get a hard time, but some of this work done by suppliers is actually way better. Actually, the suppliers are really, really good, particularly the venues. The venues are amazing on sustainability. There's always going to be 1 or 2 people who pick you up on a straw or a wrapper for a sandwich. And this is where measurement becomes quite important, because then you can see where the biggest impacts come from.
Sure.
And it's always going to be travel. So if you make a 1% difference on travel, and actually you could save a forest full of trees on big shows.
Yeah, but it's difficult, because you're not going to be. I'm going to stop short of sounding like George W. Bush and some of his crazy references to you can fool some of the people all of the time and they're the ones we should concentrate on. But there are always going to be people who find a hole or find a thread to pick at a little bit. You look at F&B in events, pre-packaged is required because you're serving a lot of people in a short period of time. People will want their lunch sometime between 12 and 2 o'clock. And so you're going to get a rush on. And if you stand there and you have an outlet that's making every single sandwich fresh for people, you're then going to have a group of people who complain about how long it took to get served. So
there's good ideas in that. Now, this is where our approach is. So I get out there and I say, look, this is what we're doing. We don't know everything, but this is what we're doing. Call us out. And 90% of the people will call you out on stuff that you can't do anything about. But within that, if you're genuinely listening, there are nuggets and there's ideas. And actually, just because it's something that you can't do anything about today, doesn't mean that something might come up tomorrow. So you have to genuinely listen and realize that if anyone's giving you feedback, even if you don't want to hear it, and even if it's something that you think, oh, but we've been doing it like that for 50 years, how can we possibly change? That just won't happen. Well, it might. And if you're genuinely listening and you're genuinely collecting opinions, eventually it might change.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get, you know, we have probably faced and had to field the same sort of questions that you no doubt have fielded as a company. You know, when you're running going back to the international event scenario, you know, you're having to fly over to Boston for events, you know, so there's air travel involved, and no doubt people then question you on how is that sustainable? And yet I learned recently on this podcast that the second biggest consumer of electricity is behind Amsterdam in the Netherlands is Facebook's servers. The Facebook server facility that's in the Netherlands is the second biggest consumer of electricity and energy behind Amsterdam. Below that, then it's the other. Now, so when you take that as a scenario and somebody questions, well, 8 of you have flown over from the UK on aeroplanes. The reality is at your event in Boston, there's probably more power being used by the server space that's running everybody's mobile phones that are in that building than on your air travel.
Well, or it's just replying to emails and saying thanks. Actually, those emails then get stored somewhere, which so, you know, we've tried to stop that in our organization. This is the minutiae in terms of where we've got to. I've got a little thing at the bottom of my email that says, if I don't reply saying thank you, it's because of this. My argument is that, yes, flying over to the States, there's no hiding it. We shouldn't be doing that as much as we are. Our long-term desire is to actually have an office in the States to make that less necessary. The short term, can I do anything about it? No. I can't solve every single problem. And for me to stand up and say, I am completely sustainable, well, the most sustainable thing I could do would be to just kill myself and not run any events and not buy anything, not do anything. But I think there's a middle ground. I hope there is, because otherwise I'm going to...
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, in the interest of sort of being brutally honest, I think we shouldn't be made to feel ashamed or cast asunder because we're choosing to fly over for somewhere for business. It's a reality of doing business. It's a reality of what we're doing, and it will take a long time to change. It's been happening for years, and what we're doing this year is, you know, we have to do it. And I just feel like that sometimes in recent years there's been almost an underlying point that some people are trying to make, that suddenly we should stop air travel completely, not do it. Well, you're going over to fly over there for business. Well, that's not very sustainable. It's unfortunately unavoidable.
It's not about stopping everything that you do. It's about questioning everything that you do and making small changes, because we're going from left to right, but that's a gradual process. And the ideological position that we could turn up tomorrow and everyone will be running events net zero is I mean, that's just impossible. It's never going to be achieved. But we've all signed a roadmap and a path, and this is why the UFI pledge, why all of the various pledges that are out there are time-based, and they're based gradually over time, is because for us to go from left to right takes a lot of change. A lot of things have got to happen between now and then. The airline industry is working on becoming more sustainable, and they're learning along the way as well. So you can't vilify an entire industry, which is really, really important to business and trade, which is important to people's well-being and livelihoods, in just the same way as the planet. You actually have to find a way to work constructively towards moving to creating a solution that works for everybody. Now, don't get me wrong, the environment is the biggest crisis that we will ever experience in our lifetimes. And if we don't act, we're all screwed. And we, you know, as a dad, I kind of want to make sure that I play my part in that. But I think my role is, rather than questioning me on 1 or 2 flights a year that I might take, question me on the impact that I make by the changes I make across everything that I do.
Absolutely.
I would hope that I get to the point that when I'm cast off this mortal coil, that the flights that I took were justified, and that the outcomes that I delivered and the changes I made offset those.
Mm.
You know, no one's questioning me when we plant 10,000 trees after an event. But if you ask me why I took one flight, that feels like maybe you're not taking everything in the round.
Absolutely. I'd need, as we sort of get towards the end of time on today's episode, just looking at through the dates for all the events, and they're fairly well spread out throughout the year. The portfolio that you've now got, you've got the running shows which pretty much run back to back in the UK and then flip straight over to the USA. Similar for the outdoor expo, you've sort of got a 4-week separation. Coming up, I think if on the website. I'm looking at National Cycling Show, 17th of June.
This weekend.
This weekend. Before we wrap up today, just give us a bit of a process of where we are at the moment with that, and how are things going in terms of numbers and all that sort of stuff.
I mean, that show is flying. It's like we had a really hard first year with that show because there was an old cycling show that used to be at the NEC and it moved, and then we decided to launch a show. And a lot of people thought we were the same show. So they expected it to be this 20-year-old show that had everybody in it. And it was a launch for us. And there was a bit of a disconnect. We didn't quite get it right. And we were a bit, normally everything that we do when we launch it is amazing. But this one was okay. And we kind of looked ourselves hard in the mirror and went, this is not what we do. And actually, I have to give credit to the team that worked on it because it is flown this year. We've got all of the big cycling brands coming into it now. It's the visitor numbers are over 30,000 on the pre-reg. It's absolutely killing it. We've got Chris Hoy there and loads of other people that you would expect. If you're a cycling enthusiast, like basically everything that you could possibly want. And it's just done so well. I can take no credit for it whatsoever. This will be the first show that Raccoon Media Group has run that I'm not going to. I'm actually going to be in the States looking at another event. But Steve and Addy, who have led on that show, have absolutely smashed it. So I think it's going to be a really exciting weekend.
Well, that's a really sort of positive way to round up today's show, because as a business, I'm responsible for myself. I'm a freelancer. I have to look after me, and that's pretty much it. As a business owner and a business leader, to be able to confidently say that you're not going to one of your events because you're confident in your team running that's probably a significant decision for you to make individually, but if you can confidently make it, it shows what sort of a good setup and team of people are there.
Yeah, hire good people, get out of their way, somebody said once, and that's the running show this year. Was the best running show that we've ever had by a mile. It outperformed in every other metric, commercially, visitors, satisfaction, all of those things. And it was the only one since we'd launched it that I was not involved in. So it turns out I'm the problem. So these guys are so much better. So I wholeheartedly believe in that. I think if you've got good enough people around them, don't micromanage them. Let them do what they're good at. And we're lucky enough to have some really good people in this business. So I'll just get out of the way, go and have a beer in the sunshine, like you said earlier.
As we wrap up today's podcast, important to point you followers and listeners in the right direction. RaccoonMediaGroup.com is the website for Mike's company. Go and have a little look around the brands and what it is that they're doing, and obviously all of those shows and everything that we talked about today will have their own social media platforms, LinkedIn pages, etc. If you're working in the industry and you want to find out a bit more about Raccoon Media Group and the various shows and brands that they operate under that banner, please do head over to RaccoonMediaGroup.com and have a look on their website. Really interesting stuff. The other thing you can do, of course, if you're listening to this podcast today, is head over to eventindustrynews.com. All the latest news, features, special supplements, all that sort of stuff that's happening in the industry is on the eventindustrynews.com website. If you're not already a subscriber of the EIN newsletter, head over and do that. You can also see video versions of all of our podcasts if you are listening to us today. Of course, if you're already watching on the website, thanks very much for tuning in today. Have a little nosy around the other elements of the website whilst you're here. And don't forget that you can also go then in the opposite direction and subscribe to the podcast via wherever you you get them from and listen to audio only versions of those whilst you're out and about and enjoying this glorious UK sunshine. It brings us to the end of today's episode, and it leaves me really to just say thank you very much to our guest today, Mr. Mike Seaman, the CEO of Raccoon Media Group, for having a great, honest and frank conversation about some of the challenges. Believe me, if this was a late night recording and we'd had a few glasses of wine down us, there'd be many more things that we could discuss that we did off air before today's recording. But thanks, Mike, for your time. Good luck with everything and continued success of the media group.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you on the next edition of the podcast. Goodbye, everybody.